This episode is sponsored by Transcend, a veteran-owned and operated performance optimization company that I introduced recently as a sponsor on this show. Well, since then, I have actually been using my products and I've had incredible success. There was initial blood work that was extremely detailed, and based on that, they offered supplementation. So I began taking DHEA, BPC 157 for inflammation, based on the fact that I've been a stuntman, a martial artist, and a firefighter my whole life. Lots of aches and pains. Dihexa to help cognition after multiple punches to the head and shift work, and peptides. 4 months later, they did a detailed blood work again, and I was actually able to taper off 2 of the peptides because my body had responded so well to just one of them that it was optimized at that point. So I cannot speak highly enough of the immense range of supplementation that they offer, whether it's male health, female health, peptides to boost your own testosterone, which I would argue is needed by a lot of the fire service, or whether it's exogenous testosterone needed, especially after TBIs or advanced age. Now, as I mentioned before, the other side of this company is an altruistic arm called the Transcend Foundation, which is putting veterans and first responders through some of their protocols free of charge. Now, Transcend are also offering you, the audience, 10% off their protocols. And you can find that on jamesgearing.com under the Products tab. And if you want to hear more about Transcend and their story, listen to episode 808 with the founder, Ernie Colling. Or go to transcendcompany.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show teacher, fire chief, and the man behind Too Dark 30, Marc Hill. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the world of teaching, firefighting, leadership, writing, the firefighter work week, volunteerism, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Marc Hill. Enjoy.
Well, Marc, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, thank you, James, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be on your show.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
I am right now in chilly 44 degree Fahrenheit Wausau, Wisconsin, which is in the middle of the state. I wish I was still in Florida. We were in Florida back, when was that? For my girls' spring break, end of March. And it was sunny and 75 and 80 degrees the whole time we were there in beautiful Cocoa Beach, Florida. So it's amazing how you get depressed when you lack that sunshine. You know, it's unbelievable how that, you don't realize how much you like it until it's gone.
Absolutely.
And then you're like, I want that back. I like that. I love that, Vitamin D, natural vitamin D.
That's what I find. People ask me, do I miss the UK? And of course I do. I miss many, many things about it. My family, the comedy, the manners, some of the other areas. But and then on the roads too, my God. I mean, talk about driving, totally different experience than over here. But when I look out my window and it's sunny every day, it's like a solar panel. When I go home and it's cloudy and drizzling, it really does kind of drain me. So very, very appreciative to live here in Florida.
Yeah, I was going to say, where are you, in the Orlando area?
Yeah, just north of Orlando.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying, if I could, My wife, she's still working. I'm now, obviously retired, but I tell her every day, I look at the weather, I'm like, hey, you know what? It's sunny and 75 in Cocoa Beach right now. She's like, oh, really? Yeah, that's great. Good for them. I'm like, yeah, I know, but let's go. Let's get out of here. I
Yeah.
grew up in the UP of Michigan. That's where I actually grew up. That's where my family's from. And I was used to literally, cripes, we would have snow. I remember trick-or-treating in Halloween in snowsuits. You try to squeeze your costume on under a snowsuit or over a snowsuit. And we would have snow literally until June. There was still dirty snowbanks or whatever, from all the, sand and grass, stuff they put in the road. But there were still snowbanks in the middle of June, So it's just, yeah, talk about gray, cloudy, overcast, never seeing the sun, depressing. Yeah, there's a reason why there's so many bars up there. But, it's... It can get to you. You don't realize how good it is in the sunshine when you don't have the sunshine.
One of my friends, well, my wife grew up in North Canton, and one of her best friends, who sadly we lost not too long ago, her husband I think he's from Michigan originally, if I'm not mistaken. But they would talk about, they get all their Arctic suits on and they go and saw a hole in the ice and they sit there and fish. And I'm like, I look out my window and I'm like, I don't know, maybe you should come to Florida for a bit, because you could do a lot more than cut a hole in the ice down here. But it everything has pros and cons, and we are just starting to get that heat now that makes a lot of the snowbirds then turn around and fly back the other way, because our summers here, especially in bunker gear, I mean, kudos to everyone in the state of Florida, California, Texas, the hot states. Firefighting in this kind of heat and humidity it's an experience, that's for sure.
Well, that's the thing too. Like, I remember when I've done different conferences, you know how it is. You go and you talk to people, and that was one of the things, because on TV, it looks totally different. You know what I mean? It's like, those guys, that's not turnout gear they're wearing. You know what I mean? You could just totally tell. Or like when some of those guys are doing those the stair climbs and stuff like that. I'm like, that's your shell. You're not climbing in your bunker gear. Those are tennis shoes. Those aren't boots, And it's just like, I wouldn't want to, like you said, I wouldn't, if I was in Florida, if I'm on Orlando Fire, running out of, something, and you know how it is. Most of our calls are EMS anyway. I'm not going to be in my full turnout gear, while I'm doing whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, no, if it's a structural fire, we know we have smoke and flame showing. Yeah, I'll put my turnouts on, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to wear the other stuff, And we right before I was put to pasture, we had a set of, it was both wildland rated, and it was also rated for like extrication and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up wearing that all the time, because it looked like shells, looked like your normal bunker gear, your turnout shells. And it was great. It was like, I could wear, this has got to be what they do. Yeah. This has to be it. Because otherwise, I'm walking around with my, all my turnout gear on, weighing another 300 pounds. It's like, no way, sweating my freaking whatever off, and, wishing I'd, put deodorant in places that deodorant's not meant to be. So, I couldn't imagine, doing that.
Well, you mentioned about growing up in Michigan, so let's go back there. Tell me about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings? I'm
the oldest of 3. I'm the lone son. I'm the last, actually. I'm the last Hill. I have 3 daughters, so I have no male heir. This is it. The line ends with me, right? So, my dad, all the way back, like our even though my last name is Hill, I'm actually more Finnish than I am English. My great-great-grandpa, when he came over here from Finland, which was a part of Russia at the time, back in the 1870s, Finland was a principality of Russia. So when they came over, they actually changed their last name from Attahili to Hill, because Hill, English Hill, if you wanted to work in the copper mines up in the UP and, you know, in the Upper Peninsula, if you wanted a good job, you need to be English, and they would have you be a mine boss, you know, a captain or something. So you needed to be English. So my great grandpa changed. He was like, all right, I can be English, you know. So he changed his last name, and so everyone's like assumed, oh, he's a Hill. Okay, he's from Cornwall. Ironically, after all these years of generations, I actually am a little more English than I am Finnish anymore. So it actually makes sense now, my last name. But yeah, I'm the first Hill not to work in the mines in the UP. I was my great grandpa worked in underground in the copper mines, and then he transferred over to the iron mines later on. You know, like I said, my great grandpa, when everyone came over here, everyone was working in the mines. My dad worked in the mines. Everyone worked in the mines, but that's how it was. It was literally company towns, you know. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan, especially at the time, when we're talking, you know, early 1900s, there was very little. There was a railroad system, but it was just for the mines. I mean, almost all of the copper in the entire United States, almost all of the iron ore for the entire United States came from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Until they found new deposits of ore out in Utah, which is where some of the bigger mines are now, big open pit mines, it was all coming out of the ground from Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So there was a lot of mines everywhere. I mean, literally hundreds of mines. And everyone worked for the mine. Either you worked for the mine or you worked for the company that dealt with the mine. Kind of one of those guys. It was literally company towns. So yeah, I am the first of that generation not to work in the mine. Some of the mines are still there. I've got uncle that still works up at the mine. He's going to retire actually this year. I've got some cousins too that, you know, still, so, and I got some friends that are still up there still, you know, what my dad calls knuckle draggers, you know, walking around constantly, you know, your hands are permanently stained. The cracks of your hands are permanently stained with this pink hue from the iron ore that they're chopping out of the rock. So, yeah, he wanted me to go to school. So I went to school. I went to Michigan Tech University up in Houghton, Michigan. And I went into engineering. This was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So, you know, obviously Dell computers and Gateway computers and, you know, the internet was just getting big and things like that. So my friends that were going to school there, they're like, let's make a computer company. So I'm like, all right, yeah, we'll jump on that bandwagon, right? Well, I am not a math guy. So I ended up getting pleasantly surprised to be, Mark, you know what? Engineering is probably not for you, kind of a discussion. So I was taking social studies classes to offset my bad grades. So my advisor's like, Mark, you've got so many social studies credits, you could just go be a teacher. I'm like, all right, I'll do that, sure. So then I went into teaching when I graduated, taught for many years, taught in middle and high school, football coach, track coach, powerlifting coach, all that stuff. Got my master's degree in leadership to be a principal. And in Wisconsin back in 2010, they had this law called Act 10 that was passed, and they got rid of collective bargaining rights for most teachers. So at that time, I got laid off. They made budget cuts at the middle school, and I got bumped, or they made budget cuts at the high school, and I got bumped out of my job at the middle school. And consequently, at the same time was when we had our first daughter. So I'm like, well, I guess I'll be stay-at-home dad for a while. So while I was doing that, and my wife, thankfully, my sugar mama, she was still working, I'm like, well, you know, I always had done the volunteer fire thing when I was teaching. I was a volunteer firefighter for many years. I got my EMT license, so I was also a first responder. You know, we were in a rural area. So I was one of the first ones always on scene, depending on where we were. But I always liked that. My dad had been a volunteer firefighter. So I grew up going to the fire hall and rolling hose and, you know, being on the fire trucks during parades and stuff like that. And my grandpa was a fireman so there was a history going back for me of being in that service, but my dad did not want me to go into the service full time because he had tried and failed back in the 80s. He's like, no, go to school. Actually, go do something, So I thought it was a little ironic that once I did go to school and I did get a teaching job, I then found myself in the position where like, no, I want to go and I want to try to get a full-time job. And here in Wisconsin, if you want to be a full-time firefighter, you need to be a paramedic. So while I was home with my daughter, I took the paramedic classes, got my paramedic license, and then at the same time, while I was doing that, I was on my local fire department. They had an opening for a fire chief role, and I was like, well, I'll throw my hat in the ring. You can't win the lottery until you buy a ticket, right? So I threw my hat in the ring, and they for whatever reason thought that I would be a great candidate, and they hired me as the first full-time fire chief. So I did that for a year. That was one of the longest years of my life, which is where that second book comes from. All the mistakes I made coming along the way when I was fire chief. And then, how things are, you interact with different people, and, different opportunities come up. So I ended up, from that position, I got hired with the city of Wausau, and was a full-time for them for 8 years until I finally hurt my back and they put me to pasture. So it's a long answer, but yeah, I am the oldest of three, and I've got two younger sisters, and I've got three daughters, beautiful wife who, like I said, I don't know why she married down to marry me for sure. So, trying to find the path, as they say, new paths, new pathways, new doors closed, doors open, so that's the beauty of life, right?
Well, going back to the mining, let's go all the way back to,
Sure.
your father's generation. When I asked people that were children of firefighters, career firefighters, it's interesting getting their perspective as a child. When you reflect back now, what were the pros and what were the cons of you seeing your father's experience in the mining industry?
Well, the one thing, when you're working in a mine, and I guess it correlates, and there's a lot of comparisons probably to different industrial type jobs, right? So my dad, even though he had a bachelor's degree, he went to, he played football at Northern Michigan University. He had a degree, but he never used it, not once. He never used that degree, not one time. Because it was kind of a generational and a family thing, right? It was a traditional stuff. So a lot of like the fire service, like, well, my dad was a firefighter, and grandpa was a firefighter, my uncle was a firefighter, same thing with the mine. So with my dad, as soon as he got done with school, my grandpa, which we called Papa, Art Hill, Papa gave my dad literally, I think how much was it? It was like 50 or $100. I forget what it was. He literally gave him 50 or $100. He's like, go to the Union Hall, tell him Art sent you, and you're going to get your card. So he did. He went down to Union Hall, gave him the money, and he got his union card. And so at that point, he was going to be in the millwrights with my grandpa. So my grandpa would take my dad, you'd request him as part of his crew, and then he taught him basically a lot of the stuff that he needed to know: pipe fitting, millwright work, all those different trades skills. So then when he got a full-time job at the mine, my dad was in maintenance. So they were constantly going around and making sure the, machines were working, and, making sure everything was working appropriately, and, all that stuff. Well, the thing with the mine is he worked shift work. So he would work, what was it? He'd work like 4 days of days. Then he'd work 4 days of nights or afternoon shift. And then he'd work 4 days of nights. And then he'd have a few days off. So as a kid growing up, you had to be quiet, like shut up, because dad was either at work or he was home sleeping to work the night. You know what I mean? So you had to be out of the house, like go find something to do, you know. And my mom had always worked as well. So, you know, it was classic, you know, latchkey, like, hey, there's stuff in the fridge when you get home from school, and, you know, shut up and be quiet, you know, don't bother anybody. You know what I mean? So you learned, you learn real quick that, you know, in order to get ahead in the world, you've got to do, there's certain steps you have to do. You have to work hard. You have to get education. You have to get training. You have to do all these things and earn your way through, you know, call it merit-based, all the different stuff. You have to go through the process, right? And so, you know, I learned that really, really early on that, hey, you know, be quiet, your dad's sleeping or whatever's going on. Or because I was the oldest, no one else was home, Mark is in charge of my two little sisters. So I'm making sure that they are quiet, that they have what they, you know, so it's just, that's just kind of what happened. That was the, you know, the beauty or the downfall of the 80s and early 90s. That's the way it was, you know. And, you know, you learn to be self-reliant. You learn to, you know, take care of the problems. If you got a problem, you take care of it, you know, you figure it out, you know. And there's no internet to look things up. There's no YouTube to find a video. There's, you know, none of that stuff. You know, you got to figure it all out on your own. So, you know, a lot of the things that, you know, I learned from my dad and my grandpa too was, you know, it takes sacrifice to truly get what you want done for your family, you know, and provide for them the life that you want to provide for them, or to save the money that you need to save to do the things that you want to do. And, you know, those are all very good life lessons that I learned when I was growing up that, you know, carrying on forward now, you know, myself, you know, I've tried to instill both in my daughters and in the things that I've done myself. So.
What about from the union perspective? On one hand, you saw union busting happening that literally cost you your career in the education space. We have a union here in the fire service. What is the strength of the mining union? And then what did you see that worked well with that union that maybe we need to lean into in education or firefighting?
Well, the thing that's always interesting, especially with unions, because I've been a union president, I've been a steward. So when you're in the upper echelons of the union, it's a lot like being a fire chief, right? Everyone kind of looks from the down, like from the bottom, like bottom up, right? And you think, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? Why they're not, they need to be doing more, you know, blah, 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 blah. Insert, you know, usual gripes and complaints here, right? The thing is, once you get to those positions, especially at those top levels, it's all about politics at that point, literally and figuratively. It's trying not to upset, you know, from the school day when I was a school board president, or the school, our union president for the teachers union. So I wanted to have a good relationship with the superintendent of the school district, right? I didn't want to piss him off, because if him and I got into a disagreement, or if him and I didn't see eye to eye, or, you know, whatever the issue was, then when it came time to contract negotiations, instead of having, you know, like you and me right now sitting down and having a discussion, like, okay, this is what we'd like to do, this is what we'd like to offer, you know, a back and forth, instead of having, you know, an amicable, you know, actual discussion, it would be, no, we're going to go to arbitration. I'm getting the lawyer and we're not going to talk. Well, now the negotiations are now over, and now we're left to an arbitration judge, or, you know, lawyers now, that we have to settle whatever the disagreement is. It's much better to have a discussion and have a conversation, right? So you have to grease the wheels. You got to be a politician where, you know, we have to work together. So we have to go to lunches, we have to go to dinners, we have to, you know, do these things to try to make sure that, you know, our relationship is good and on speaking terms. From the bottom, we don't see that. We don't see all the hand holding and the handshaking. We don't see that from the bottom. All we see from the bottom is they're not doing enough. We need more overtime pay. We need this. We need that, right? And to get those things is like literally the phrase of getting blood out of a turnip. It's incredibly difficult. right? Everyone would love to have, freaking 8% raises every year. And everyone would love to have, no deductibles for our health insurance. And everyone would, of course everyone would love those different things, right? But it's just not reality, The administration and the municipality or whatever, they are set with they're literally, their hands are tied with what they are able to do, be it from a standpoint of their tax base, and it depends on where you live, right? Orlando's got a different tax base. They've got different hotel revenue that are coming in. There's different, Florida's got different laws than the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin's got different municipal codes where, our state, we have different funding regulations, so it's amazing where we are literally 50. People always forget, well, it's the US system. Like when you go back over to UK, well, why does the US do this thing? They should do this differently, or you should do this or whatever. People forget. The United States of America, we are 50 independent states that come together to form a federal democracy republic. Okay, we aren't, imagine the state of Florida with like 25 million plus people, right? That's as big as Canada, the entire country, right? So Florida, is different than here in Wisconsin. We've barely got 8 million people, right? Or think of Alaska. Huge. Alaska is a third the size of the continental United States, but yet the population is, you know what I mean? So we are all different because we all have separate and different laws. So when it comes to union regulations on a national scope, right? Like say the IAFF, right? The International Association of Firefighters, or even the fire chiefs, right? They have separate, there's things they can do nationally to talk for all of us on a national level, dealing with like the AFG grants, or maybe the NFA courses, or things like that, or maybe trying to spur on the cancer, databases, or trying to get the ability for people to collect Social Security earlier as a firefighter, things like that, right? There's national things they can do on a national level as a union base, but 9 out of 10 things that we decide, or that really affects us, is on the local level. It's not on that national level, right? There's a little bit, yeah, sure, we can, maybe poke someone to say, hey, give us a good word when we apply for this AFG grant or the SAFER grant or whatever, but, it's not really up to our union members to help us get those things, right? It's all about local. It's about what we can do with your local base salaries, about what you can do with your local health insurance coverages, your local liabilities, dealing with, workers' comp, coverages, duty disability stuff, things of those nature. That's what the union needs to concentrate more on. I think a lot of people, like I said, people get too into the weeds of national politics and national BS, when it's local first. There are some things that affect us nationally, but 9 out of 10 of them is going to be happens down the street at your local city hall or the municipality government center, wherever you're at. That's where the nuts and the bolts and the actual, where the rubber meets the road, that's where it happens. It's not on these national big, what someone's doing or what they're not doing or what things are cut, or, it's at the local level that we need to spend more of our time doing those things. And like I said, a lot of it we don't see from the bottom what happens on that top level. And it's all about politics. It's all about trying to make the best out of a lot of bad situations. It really is.
Well, I mean, I'm nauseated by the fact that a room of grown-ups can't make a decision. So this whole politicking, greasing the wheel, like that needs to go, full stop.
It sucks.
It's absolute bullshit.
Sucks.
And then on a national standard, one conversation that should have been happening for, I would argue, 20 years now, is a national standard work week for the fire service. and the current IAFF leadership are in the city of Boston, which is a 42-hour work week. So nationally, where is that voice saying, hey, rest of the country that are working 56 plus hours, we need to fight for you to have the same work week? So yeah, I agree. There's some minutia, like do you get polo shirts and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, that's a very local thing. But the simple standard of living, the working week, is standardized in every other national institution, trucking, aviation, shipping. But our profession, as long as I've been, in uniform and then back out the other end, has never even mentioned why so many of our firefighters are working these insane work weeks. So this is where, two things that I'm pulling from what you said. Firstly, if grown-ups can't talk without needing dinners and lunches and massages, then shame on you. You're in the wrong fucking position. And secondly, if you don't have a backbone to advocate for the people and you yourself and enjoying a 42-hour work week, also shame on you.
Yeah, the problem is, and it goes back to, like I said, it's hard to do things nationally because every state's different.
But that's not the same with I'm saying trucking, shipping, all those ones as a national standard. You as a pilot cannot fly for X amount of years, X amount of hours. You are regulated to have a break, but we don't have this in our profession.
It does depend though, because for example, the state of Wisconsin, when they passed Act 10, they got rid of the teachers' collective bargaining rights. Police and fire were exempt from Act 10. So the police and fire unions were exempted from those collective bargaining right pullaways from that law. Now, why was that? Well, because the police and fire unions lobbied, played politics, and then it's not. They're looking out for themselves. They're looking out for their best interest, but at the same time, you're then screwing the teachers, right? Mm-hmm. Or you're then screwing the nurses, or you're then you know what I mean? So, and as a union, my number one job and concern is just the firefighters, and the Teamsters, their number one concern and their number one job are the truckers, right? Same thing with the airline pilots, air traffic controllers is a little separate. It's a little different because of the number and what happened to them back in the 80s under Reagan. But at the same time, every single union is only interested in their own selective collective self-interest. And unfortunately, you're right. Unfortunately, when push comes to shove, the union is going to take the position of what's best for them and their membership only. So if that means leaving the teachers hanging out to dry, like what happened here, then that's what's going to happen. You know what I mean? And I can't fault them for that. I don't blame them for doing that, because they are doing what their job is. They are supposed to be looking out just for their membership and just for, what's in the best interest of the firefighters of the state of Wisconsin. And, God bless them for doing it. Right. But at the same time, it goes back to politics. I totally agree with you, James. Politics sucks. It's a big freaking, it's a giant albatross, and it shouldn't happen like that, and things should be different, and it would be awesome if it was different. It would be great if it would be different, but, unfortunately, the system that we have is the system we have, and we can only make, small adjustments to how things are. And, it's almost to the point, at least a little bit, depending on what you want to talk about, but it's to the point where you have to choose your poison, right? I can choose to take the high road and not to be 100% totally committed with all these different things, and just be the solid stonework in the foundation, or I can try to get the best deal for my people that are under me. That, it may, some of it may suck, but a lot of it may be great. Maybe it's a 80-20 thing where 80% of it's fantastic, but we're still missing on that 20%. So then it's like, okay, then you come to your membership, you say, listen, this is the deal that's presented before us. we're a union. We can decide, do we want to take the 80% and get most of what we want, or do we want to get zero?
I'm not even talking about. I'm not talking about negotiations. I'm talking about a standardized work week that will impact mental health, cancer, relationships. I mean, all the things that we suffer from. It's not mentioned, so it's not a negotiation. It's an absolute must.
Well, our work
and what's
week,
happening in Florida is there is people that are starting to realize this. And the crazy thing is, I am by no means an economist. I'm not a business person. But when you look forensically at the economics, the reason that these people are changing is because they're drowning in debt because of the vacancies they have in the fire service. So this is a national recruitment crisis. So it's not even a negotiation. You're literally pointing out to these cities and counties, if you do not change, you're going to lose your fire department. So this is a great opportunity to finally change. But this isn't about, protecting a few dollars of a pay raise or anything like that. This is something that is literally the elephant in the room, or the herd of elephants in the room, in the physical, mental health crisis, relationship, I mean, everything that we suffer from. And yet, when it's cancer, we've got this, this study in Miami, and they're looking at carcinogens, and okay, that's great. But what are you doing about sleep deprivation? That is a known carcinogen. The mental health thing, we've got the IFF peer support team. That's still reactive, really. What are you doing about the thing that's known to break down the brain, the mental health, the sleep deprivation? So this is what angers me is I've been talking about this for 8.5 years, just on this podcast alone. And there's, real experts that have been talking about this for a long, long time. So this isn't about, what will they give us? This is about us as a united front standing up and saying, this needs to change. Like the suffragettes, like the people that opposed, child labor, which is being reversed in some states again, which blows my mind. But this is not about negotiations and politicking. This is about all of us standing side by side and saying enough is enough. And if the union isn't going to fix it, then all right, well then, whatever, we're still going to demand this is changing, because every single day there are Maltese crosses with black bands in them. This is the thing that I'm talking about. Meanwhile, nothing is happening from, and again, I'm not tarring everyone with the same brush, but if you are a union that's opposing fitness standards, that's not talking about the work week, or opposing it because you want more overtime or whatever the thing is, you are part of the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I do. Part of, though, like you said, the work week thing. For me, I look at it a little different. So for me, I understand what you're saying, and it would be great if we could do it nationally. However, like I said, every state's different. So every state has different laws about what is, accepted. So in our contract, in our local contract, our work week is specified in our contract.
How many hours do your cops work?
I have no idea.
Probably 40 hours.
I never bothered what their contract said, because
I guarantee you it's 40 hours. This is my point. It doesn't matter about the state.
I know they work 12s. I think it's some definition or some variation of 12s. I know they work 12s. I think they work like 3 12s, and then they're off for like 3 days or something like that. But to make it even worse, you want to talk about making things not better but worse. There are many departments that are switching to the 48-96 shift,
which is insane.
Our shift, my local department just switched to the 48-96, which I can't believe that they did that, but they did. When I was working, it was 24 on. It was the California swing: 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 24 off, 24 on. And then we had 72 off. So that's the way we had it, and it worked out fine. But even that is a bad swing.
100%.
When I was down in Alabama, doing my hazmat technician, we had a guy instructing us from Washington, D.C., and their schedule was a 24 with a 72 off.
Yep, which is what that's what I'm saying. The whole Northeast works 24/72.
That would be absolutely awesome if we could do that. New York, FDNY, I forget the last time they run a weird modified, like they'll work a 10, then they work a 14, And then they've got a weird kind of they break their 24-day down into stuff like that. But there's a lot of different ways to do it. This is the problem, though, James. Everybody wants something differently. So for example, and this goes back to the freaking politics again. Say the city of Wausau wants to change to the 24/72, right? That means we have to add an entire fourth shift, right? You can't do that with a 3-platoon system. It has to be 4.
Yeah.
So that means that we would have to hire, the city of Wausau would have to hire an additional, an entire crew to do that kind of shift work, which would mean, I don't even know how many millions of dollars that would mean.
Is the city of Wausau fully staffed now? Have they got people banging on the door to work for them? Has they got a huge list like used to have 20 years ago?
No.
Exactly. This is the problem.
And
people are wising up at the work week now, and it's creating vacancies, which is creating overtime, which is where the money is for these extra people. But people are so myopic.
I mean, that's the thing. People get hurt. They're out on workers' comp and they're out on light duty for how many days, and they're doing, yeah, absolutely. I don't think the recruitment and retention issue, though, I honestly don't think recruitment and retention problems are from the work week. I really don't. I think the recruitment and retention problems are really, a lot of it stems from the fact that our entire culture and the history and the way things happen in our local communities is completely different than it was when I was growing up as a kid, right? There's very few people that are volunteer firefighters anymore. For instance, in the state of Florida, there's very few fire departments that are volunteer, right? Most of it's countywide system. They're all full-time. If you're a kid, for instance, in the state of Florida, if you want to go and be a firefighter, you go to your local community or technical college, where then you have to pay for your firefighter 1 class, your EMT class. You pay all that 100%, right? That's the state of Florida rules. Well, guess what? Here in Wisconsin, it's completely different. In Wisconsin, you can get your firefighter certifications for free. You don't pay a dime. You can get your EMT license for free. You don't pay a dime. Well, if you're a kid in Wisconsin and you can get everything for free, literally all of your education, fire 1, fire 2, driver operator, pumper, aerial, you can get everything for free, absolutely free, James, 100% free. Why the hell are we having recruitment and retention issues?
Well, I can tell you. I mean,
it's not the sleep. It's not the sleep for us in Wisconsin here. In Wisconsin here, it's not a sleep thing. Even though I think that schedule, which my department went to, is crazy. I would never want to work it myself. It's not for me. That's not the answer. For me, the answer is kids aren't growing up in the firehouse anymore. They're not growing up in the firehouse like I did, rolling hose with my dad while he was on the fire station. Hearing my dad's pager go off at night and him leaving in the middle of the night to go to a fire, right? In my little town where I grew up, when there was a fire, there was a siren. It was like a tornado siren that went off for the whole town. That, hey, there's a fire, get to the fire hall, get your butt on the truck and get going. Everyone's dad was a part of that system, right? I rode those fire trucks in the parades, throwing out candy to the other kids. My Cub Scout meetings were all at the fire station. My birthday parties were all at the fire station. My friends, their dads were in the fire station. It was a community thing. We don't have that community anymore.
Why did your dad not want you mining anymore? Why did your dad not want you mining anymore? Why didn't he want you to be a miner too?
He wanted me to not be in the mine. That was not the fire department.
Exactly.
The fire department was volunteer.
So right? No, but I'm saying this is what's happening now. Like the best recruitment tool that we have are firefighters. The best recruitment tool the military used to have were the members of the military. But you're getting a generation now that are being worked into the ground. I don't know your specific department. If you barely run any calls and 56 hours is a wonderful experience for your firefighters, then I'm not using you as an example. But every fire department that I've worked for that is running most of 24 hours at a time for
Oh yeah, they're
56
getting
hours a week,
dismounted.
that's getting them
Yes.
mandatory overtime for
Yep.
like 20 years of my career. My
Yep.
generation are not telling their children, you should be a firefighter. And I would argue it's probably the same thing that your dad as a miner was telling you, I don't want you to go in the mines. And so, yes, it's a different generation with this young group. But the thing is, people are looking always at the negative. The positive of this generation is they're growing up appreciating physical health, mental health, relationships. And they're looking, as the Wall Street Journal did a thing recently, they are going into the trades. The Gen Zs are going into the trades.
Yes.
Because they're looking at college and going, this is ridiculous. $40,000, $60,000 worth of debt. And like your dad, a bachelor's that you never use.
Yep.
So, but they're looking at the work week and they're going, well, wait a second, 56 hours a week. And then when I Google, is it healthy to be a firefighter? All I see is cancer, divorce, heart disease, strokes, all the things.
Yeah.
And so it is the working environment. It's not the job. I think if we actually showed these young people that we care enough to give them a working environment that actually allows them to perform at a higher level and have longevity, I think we'd have them back in droves. I really, really do. But we have allowed, going back to the unions, to our men and women to be worked into the ground, and literally, like we know on a daily basis, we see all these firefighters that we lose. And until we change the working environment, the profession itself that we love is truly at risk. Because as you said, one day the tones will go off and no one will be there to respond. So I disagree with it. It's not the sleep, because I think it's exactly what it is. It's the lack of rest and recovery, the lack of value of the men and women that are in uniform by departments, by arguably even our own union, who has not fought for us to have this standardized work week. That is the reason that we have this national recruitment crisis. And if we fix the things that are glaringly broken, as many departments have started to do in Florida now, they have already seen a complete 180 and they have people lining up around the building now to work for them. But if we bury our head in the sand and say, oh, it's not the work week, then, I disagree completely. It absolutely is the work week that is the biggest thing. Now, is it only the work week? Of course not. It's culture, it's fitness standards, it's all these other things that we've got to put in place. But that is what has dissuaded these people. And the fewer people that go into the service, the more mandatory overtime that's put on the shoulders of the men and women still in uniform. And that is unfair to them and it's unfair to their families.
Yes. No, you're right in the fact that, I do think, sleep obviously has a huge component to it, but it's hard to do something like that on a national level, unfortunately. It really is.
But it wasn't hard to shut down the whole country when COVID came in. This is the thing that blows me away. And again, goes back to that politicking. If you had a group of men and women...
That's different. It depends on what state you lived in, whether you're shut down or not.
You literally go, do you want to close the buildings or not? And someone said yes, like overnight, everything's going to be closed. It's the same thing. Do you want to take that money from downstream, invest in, like you said, a D shift, and therefore stop the bleeding financially and then improving recruitment again? That is literally a group of grown-ups in a room, one-day conversation. But this is the thing, the pushback you get is, oh, but it's complicated. It is not complicated. The way that we're doing it now is not working. And it's nauseating. And I'm not saying this is what you're saying, but national organizations, but. The science is irrefutable. Just even if you just listen to the people I've had on the show, completely irrefutable. I've had experts from the military, sporting communities, every parallel kind of profession. And, like I said, the proof is in the pudding. These Florida departments are showing that it's working and showing that now they're fully staffed. So there's no more overtime, apart from obviously occasional ones and, the hurricanes and that kind of thing. So it's really about, exactly like you said, dissolving this, I need blue M&Ms in my green room bullshit that I hear from the IFF. And I literally had that. They came to Disney and they literally were specifying they needed these kind of suites and, just ridiculous. And getting back to, like you said, rolling up your sleeves and fighting for the actual men and women, like being about them, not about you. And we've allowed so many layers of red tape that it's literally created complete inertia. And meanwhile, our men and women are dying. So I think that this is a kind of, all right, enough is enough conversation. We need to figure out who's doing it right. Well, the Northeast has been doing it right for decades, and we copy their hose lays and their high-rise tactics, but we turn our heads to their work week. And we need to say, all right, but then this is what we need to do nationally. And I think that the work week should be a professional national standard.
I agree. It should, but it never will.
Right, we'll agree to disagree there, because I'm going to make sure that it does.
Yeah. Well, I would love for that to happen. It's just because we're 50 different states. You in order to have that happen, you would have to have every state pass the same rules.
So what about bank clerks, baristas in Starbucks?
What about them?
They work 40 hours.
Sure.
That's what I'm saying. So that's a national standard. Why is it any different for the fire service?
Well, because the fire service we have certain protections and exemptions from all those different things.
But why?
You know what I mean?
It's not for our benefit.
No, it's for the municipality's benefit. But unfortunately, I agree with you, James. I would, like I said, I would love to see those things. But the way the municipalities and the way the state constitutions and the way the laws are in every state, it is not written that way. But it's not.
I believe, and I'll stand corrected.
I agree. I 100% agree with you, James. It's not fair. It's not fair.
No, I'm not saying about fair. The municipalities that made it change just said, well, we're changing it anyway. So it's not like a binding thing where you cannot work 40 hours. The whole FLMA thing, if I'm getting this right, that's your overtime over and above whatever it is, 42, 44 hours.
Well, FMLA only guarantees you certain times off for certain family medical leave. That's a little different. You'd have to have a FLACIS cycle, the fair labor
FLSA,
share agreement.
Sorry, I'm getting my acronyms. That's what I meant to say.
No, it's fine.
Removed from all that.
That's the difference. Yeah, FLACIS cycles are different, but it all depends. It goes back. It depends on what your contract says for what you have agreed to your work week in your contract.
Yeah, so this is the thing is that people agreed that once. People can now change that. And I know, for example, Pasco County, they were like, 100%. Well, look, it kicks in after 40 whatever hours. Well, if we don't get there, it becomes a moot point at this point. So this is the thing. Everyone feels like they're shackled by these certain areas. And then you look at the departments that did it. They're like, yeah, we just like, okay, well, we're not going to be working overtime. If we do, the first few hours will be straight time. But, we get to be home with our family if 3 days at a time. That's far greater than a few bucks on these few hours of overtime. So I keep hearing, oh, we can't because, rather than, well, how can we? And this is what these departments have done. They've looked at it and go, well, yeah. And then it's not just Florida. I got a department in Texas is about to go to it. I just heard one in North Carolina is about to go to it. So if these departments can look at it and go, well, we're gonna change that, then imagine when there's that national push and everyone starts questioning these kind of, it's like the horse tethered to the plastic chair. At what point do you realize that, again, like I always tell people, the people that tell you can't work less than 56 hours a week work 40 hours. The admin chiefs, the city and county council members. So at what point do we say enough is enough? When we used to run one fire a week, I'm sure it worked back then. But that hasn't been the case for decades and decades. So now we have to advocate and bring our work week down to everyone else's.
Well, I think the other problem too, when you look at it, is we in the fire service, we are our own worst enemies. Think about how much work that we do that people just call us to go do. That's not part of our job description. Look at fire prevention. The fire educations, depending on your municipality and depending on where you're at, you could wear 20 different hats, right? I was a hazmat technician. I was a paramedic. I was, fire 1, fire 2. I had my officer certification. I was also, I was entry level fire investigations. You're going out doing public education, with the fire, you're doing fire prevention inspections. Doing code violations. So depending on your municipality, you could have 20 different roles, right? Then if under that same mentality, we shouldn't be doing anything more than what we should be doing, right? And we are always our worst enemies. We're always taking on more jobs. Yes, we'll do that. Yes, we can do that. Yeah, we'll do this. And yes, we'll do that. When these other jobs, want to talk about police, if someone comes in and asks someone for directions, asks a cop for directions, he counts that as the call. He counts that as a contact. Now, if someone stops by the fire station and asks for directions, do we file an incident report saying that we had a public community contact? No, we don't bother with that. But the cops do. Why do they do that? Well, because they know that numbers, data matters to them, and to enable that they have the shifts that they have on the police side, they need to account for all of the contacts they have with the public, right? So they count those things where we don't. And I got reprimanded once for pulling my ambulance over and helping someone push their car out of an intersection. I got reprimanded because I didn't create an incident. So yeah, we are our own worst enemies a lot of the time. We are doing more work. Want to talk about work? We're doing more work than we should be doing. But again, that goes back to the mentality of what's going on, in the service itself, and until we stop doing those other jobs that other people should be doing, or enables the department to argue for more workers, right, to have more crews, then you're never going to get back to the thing that you want in the first place, right? Because if you've created a precedent where you've done all this work for all these years and you've never bitched and complained, but now all of a sudden you're bitching and complaining about the work that you're doing. You see what I'm saying? That's when
no one's bitching and complaining.
That's when
the
you
problem.
get to the municipalities who are saying, well, it's been fine for 50 years. It's been fine for 100 years. You never said anything about this for the past 50, whatever. Everything was fine before. Why all of a sudden is there different? And that's where the politics, I know it's unfortunate, but that's where that comes in. Because when I was a fire chief and I wanted a new fire truck, I couldn't just go buy one myself. I needed to get approval for that. I needed to get spending from the municipality to approve that spending, to approve that truck purchase, right? I couldn't just go and do it. I would love to have gone and done whatever the hell I wanted to, but I didn't. I needed permission, right? Because that's the system that we had. So I had to work with the system, and I had a great PowerPoint, James. It was fantastic. It had all kinds of data, how we needed a new truck and we were spending this on maintenance and all these different things. And I went on and on and on in that public budget meeting. I went on for 45 minutes, James. And you know what they asked me in the end? How much? They could give two shits about my data. They could give two shits about all the things, all the reasons, all the blah, 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 everything. It was awesome. They could give two shits about any of that. How much? And literally, they were like, I got no time to listen anymore. How much do you want? Well, it's going to cost $750. Do we have the money? Then the budget guy comes in. Well, we can do this, this, and this. Great. We'll do it. You're approved. Next. That's the reality of what we're dealing with,
Well, this is why we've got a hook now, is because if you get exactly like you said, the budget guy of cities and counties to say, how much are you spending on overtime? How much are you spending on training young recruits? And then they walk out the back door 1, 2, 3 years later. Workman's comp claims, lawsuits when you guys are tired. You look at the money now, because I've seen this. I mean, don't get me wrong. It is acutely, obvious that there's a lot of people, especially in those positions, that these suicides, these cancers, these, all these deaths don't move them at all. It makes no difference. Even some fire chiefs, it's the same thing. And it's not, or let's say on union presidents too, it doesn't seem to make any difference. Nothing is done. So money is money talks, bullshit walks, as they say. So it's like, all right, well then here is the money that you're all wasting. And this is I think where we have the ability now to make a difference is the fire service can say, there's your money. And by the way, this is your annual amount that you're bleeding when these vacancies are all filled with the right kind of candidate, again, not lowering the bar and taking anyone who's going to then be another problem. Now we're going to save you a bunch of money. And then I agree with you 100%. I think where the greatest abuse of EMS is, the 911 system at the bottom tier. And I love the concept that GMR talks about is a 3-tier system. So then let's also talk about calls that we shouldn't be responding to. There, the whole telehealth thing now gives you the ability to have an, whether it's GMR or another company, embed in a 911. You get the 18-month-old with, thrown up once, and the parents think they're going to die from dehydration.
Yep.
They're offered a consultation with a nurse. They take that, they get the treat at home, or they get to schedule an urgent care clinic appointment the next day. An ER bed stays open. The fire department was never called, and that patient gets a bill that's a fraction of the ER cost. So there are really great innovative solutions that we can now bring in and address the call load as well, because I agree with you 100%. We've said yes to everything. Call 911. I've done, snake retrievals and all kinds of, when there's Orange County has a massive animal control department. I'm like, why are we standing here with a bucket and a stick when we've got experts, So this is the thing. But again, it's flipping it to, all right, this is an opportunity for us to change, because what I've realized is that there's been so many finger pointing that, nothing gets done. Everyone's just blaming the other one. And it's all of us. I mean, you talk about the fire service being at fault, like my rank. We go home and we tell our neighbors we've got the best job in the world and I only work 10 days a month. And it's bullshit. A 24-hour shift is 3 8-hour days crammed together. We work 30 days a month.
Yes. We're working every day. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is, and this has been a great conversation, because this is not a debate. This is a conversation and but it's like, what a beautiful opportunity for us to finally say, I don't care how long we've been doing it for. We are at a point now where it needs to change. Like I said, whether it's children going up a chimney or women be able to vote or, whatever the thing, the way we've always done it, there's this line in the sand, and we're there now, because as you and I both know, our men and women are dying. Our young people really don't want to do this job anymore, and they're amazing human beings. There's as many great firefighters as when, you and I came on. So what an amazing opportunity for us to go, all right, we need to do something differently. And I think this is the thing, but we have to have the courage to say what we're doing isn't working.
Yes, I 100%. And I think for me, I think it really relies more on doing it locally than nationally. Yeah. We have to start at the grassroots. We have to start on our own, what we can change, right? It goes back to the classic phrase, you can only worry about what you can have control over, right? And when we, at the local level, we have control over who are, what our contract says, what jobs we do, what time we spend on this, what time we spend on that. We control our destinies, and we can only start that, and change process can only start at the bottom. It's not going to come from on high. It's not going to come from the top down.
I agree.
We have to be honest and realize that, and until, like you said, and it's like anything, like, we have so many little fiefdoms, because it's the problem with the fire services, like you said before, it can drastically be different between one municipality to another, between one county to another, right? Orange County in Florida is completely different than Brevard County, which is completely different than, Seminole. I mean, here, Marathon County, we are the largest county in the state of Wisconsin. We have tried numerous times to try to county-wide our fire and EMS system. It never gets approved because the local townships like to keep their responsibility. They like to keep their name on the truck, even though it would be better to do it, a county, this the county way, let alone a statewide or national level. They just won't even do the county level,
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How do you, because that's a really great kind of, lens that you've got. How do you, if this was to be approved, how do you absorb cities like that into a county, but allow them to maintain their identity? Because having worked for county departments myself and city departments, there is that element where you do become a number in a county. So you can see why people want to hang on to a town identity. So how do you fuse those two together so you have the best of both worlds? Obviously, a greater ability to respond and maybe better equipment and that kind of thing that you'd have on a county level, but still allowing a kind of local element to it, so the men and women of certain areas of that county still feel like they're part of something smaller.
Well, and this goes back to some of the detriments of the union. So, for example, our union would not allow us to volunteer on another department. Not allowed. The municipality would not allow it. The city of Wausau would not allow it. Our contract did not allow it. So if we lived in a rural area, and a lot of it, because we didn't have a residency requirement, so there were some guys on the department that lived an hour and a half, 2 hours away. They would just drive in to work and then they drive home. So we didn't have really well, there was technically a residency requirement. It was like 60 miles as the bird flies kind of thing, but it's just like, okay, whatever, But anyway, but the rules were you could not. All right. So and then it goes back to why was this? Well, because the city didn't want you volunteering at a local department, getting hurt on the job, coming back to work on for the city the next day, and then going out and working a job and then being hurt. And then they're like, well, how do we prove that you got hurt with us versus you got hurt with somebody else? So, which goes back to lawyers, workers' comp, blah, 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 right? So that was the rules that we had. There's another department about 45 minutes from here. They were professional, they were full-time, but they only had one station, so they were lower call volume, okay? In a more rural community, their contract did allow for their firefighters to volunteer on other departments. So you still had that aspect. When we had our county meetings talking about making it a countywide system, the IAA, our union, did not want a volunteer aspect to be part of the system because they felt, from a union standpoint, if we allowed volunteers on or allowed part-time people on, then we would not have a lot of full-time guys, that they would only hire part-time guys, and then they would staff everyone with part-time. We would lose control. We would lose membership. We would lose a contract. We would lose all the things that they quote unquote thought they had having one solid union leadership. So they fought against having volunteers and part-time part of the system here. However, Chief Probowski out in Santa Clara County, California, outside of San Francisco, they have a county system. They also have full-time guys, but they also have part-time people. They also have volunteers in an auxiliary, where what happens is you kind of get in on the bottom level. You work as a part-time guy or girl. I'm using it as a gender neutral word, But you start out volunteering or being part of the auxiliary or being part of like an explorer program, right? In the high school, you work your way up. They pay for you, or part of their system is you go to the local tech school, you get your fire certifications, then you work into a part-time position where you then get shifted around to different houses. You kind of learn different jobs, right? You learn more about being on the job. You learn about all these different processes. Then when there's a full-time opening, guess who gets first dibs? These part-time people, because you've been in the system, you've been trained all the way up. There's a whole reason why they do it like that. But again, going back to the local ways, that's how their local does it. We tried to get our local to see that way. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. So again, it all depends on how things are written locally. It all depends on how people see things and how you want to try to interact and how you want to try to get people to be brought on. I think the way they have that out in Santa Clara County would be great. It'd be awesome. I think that would behoove everyone. It would be fantastic. Because you get a group of people who are volunteering or in an auxiliary position or even in a fire explorer program. You get all those people that are interested in the position. You get them in, you get them trained. They learn the ways you do things. This is our way. And, they learn all that stuff so that when you have a full-time position open up, or you've got a bunch of different things open up, you got a huge group of people. You got all these people to choose from then, right? It would be great. But trying to have other people goes back to the politics, unfortunately, of trying to have them and convince them this is the better way. Takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And like you said, a lot of people don't want to give up their control. And when you have a countywide system, the best way you can do that is by incorporating the station and not closing the stations down. I think a lot of people worry about consolidation, that if we consolidate our departments together, we're going to lose our department. 9 times out of 10, that's not the case, right? We still need the location. We still need the vehicles, the apparatus. We still need that station to be active because of the response time or whatever we're trying to recover. But what we're going to consolidate is management. What we're going to consolidate is top level positions, right? That's what we are going to consolidate. And then you get into the politics of chiefs where they're looking out for themselves. Why should I consolidate with you when I'm going to end up losing my job? Or you get into the, like I think a lot of people and some of the things that are going on right now, you got a lot of people that are Gen Xers that are in their 50s, that are in their mid 50s, that when these consolidation efforts, they're 3 or 5 years out from retirement. They're not looking to make any changes, whether it's for the benefit, betterment of everyone or not. They're looking, I've only got 3 more years. I need to coast for 3 more years. Then you can change whatever the hell you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, going back to, like you said, that's not right. And that's not doing it for the right reason. And you're not helping anybody but yourself.
Absolutely.
But, it's kind of the crap sandwich that you're dealt with, unfortunately.
Well, this is what I struggle with, because basically all those people were my academy mates, at that time period. We're
Sure.
all like post 2000. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's obviously some that have been on for like 60 years that are literally probably going to die as part of the station. Yeah. But the average, person now, I mean, I would have been hitting 22 years, I think. Well, 21 years, excuse me, if I not, transitioned out and done this. So now you're talking about people that are in these positions. And I see that. I agree with you 100%. Well, I have got 3 years left. I don't want to do anything. And it's like this complete shift. Well, hold on, it's not about you. And I mean, just putting it all the way back to the firefighters, like a lot of the firefighters I see now on social media, it's look at me with my big mustache and my leather helmet, and I'm forcing a door, and I videoed it so you can all see it, even though I'm wearing my shorts and t-shirt, but I'm wearing my leather helmet because I'm a fucking firefighter. It's me. And it's like, where is the shift? It used to be them, for them, but it's become very, very self-serving. And I think even that a good example, if you look at the Northeast, you talked about the volunteers. I mean, there's no question that there are many areas of rural US that absolutely are going to need volunteers. That's just, if you're a town of 100 and it's all farm.
Yeah, you don't get more than 35 calls a year. You cannot have a full-time crew.
No, and of course, still have mutual aid and all that kind of thing. But then you see a lot of suburban areas like the Northeast still has volunteers. So then the conversation to me comes, well, should we even have volunteers anymore in those densely populated areas, not like you talked about other areas? And I love the idea of a tier system, of a mentorship program where you are air quotes volunteering, but you're not really, you're climbing the ladder to a career. But there's a lot of areas, again, they don't have volunteer cops. They don't have volunteer ER doctors. But again, our profession, once again, well, they'll be fine. They'll do it. They'll do it for free. They'll do 56 hours a week. Just, because we are going to respond regardless. But there's a certain point where we've got to say, okay, time out. We got to put some parameters. And there's a lot of amazing volunteer firefighters in the Northeast that should be given a career position, because that area should have full-time firefighters. So that's the other conversation nationally, is where are areas where really that volunteerism has been taken advantage of, and people that really should have been given benefits and a pension and a career doing the very thing that they are doing for free. Where is that line that we need to draw in the sand as a profession as well? Because volunteerism is incredible, but it can be taken advantage of.
Oh, 100%. And, going back to what we were saying before, like, you're doing so much more than you should, right? And going back, you're right. How many volunteer cops are there? I can't think of any, right? The outside constable, position where, but it's a numbers game, right? A small town, small town of 4,000 people, they can get away with having 3 cops. Right? You can get away with it. We can get away with the chief and 2 deputies. Go back to, Barney Fife, Mayville, and, the good old days back at, yeah, you can get away with 3 guys. You can't get away with 3 people in a fire department for that same town. Right? You can get away with having 1 doctor for the town, but you can't get away with having, 1 firefighter for that town. And, so some of it is some of it's a numbers problem, right? We require, and going back to NFPA, right? If we ever had an actual high-rise structure fire, right? Where we had 3 stations here in Wausau. We had 3 stations. We ran about 6,000 to 7,000 calls, depending. Most of it was EMS. We were a paramedic base. We transported, so we had ambulances. 3 stations covering just the city itself, which our city was just shy of 40,000 people. Right? If we had an actual high-rise structure fire, right? Our full-time crew component for per shift was 16 people. We did not have enough people. According to NFPA, we did not have enough people to fight that fire. Right? So then it gets to, do we need, for example, you want to talk about doing too much, James. So our stations, right, had 4 guys each station. Downtown had more because we had a ladder truck. We had an actual tower that was out of there, and we had our hazmat out of downtown. But anyway, so they had more guys. But the outside 2 stations, we had 4 people. That was it. 2 guys were in the ambulance. 2 guys were on the engine. That was it. If the ambulance was out, if we were busy, and there was a structure fire in our area, you got an engine with a driver and an officer. That's it. And you had maybe another crew coming from across town with 2 guys, or you had the truck company coming from downtown with 2 guys. If all the ambulances were out, which happened all the friggin' time. So we barely had staffing. Want to talk about staffing? We barely had enough people just for a residential fire of the 2 in, 2 out, let alone if we had an actual working high-rise fire. We would never, even at maximum staffing, we'd never have enough people.
How did it even get to the point where there was only 2 on a rig, where you simply cannot operate with 2 on a rig?
It was a money thing.
But I mean, if there was a school and there were 10 classrooms and they hired 4 teachers, that would never fly, because you'd have 6 classrooms of kids not being taught. As we both know, especially if you're not, truck and engine running, you cannot safely operate at a fire with a captain and an engineer. You've got someone on the radio doing a size up, you've got someone pumping, and you've got no one actually going in to facilitate a rescue.
Not legally.
I mean, not safely, not effectively.
No.
I mean, people can beat their chest, go, oh, we just went in with 1 and we took the line. Yeah, but that's the chances of you effectively doing it have gone down immensely. And then now you go down, now you're the victim and that child burns. So it blows me away again how, because you see them all the time. You there's that one on the History Channel, the Inside the Fire, was it called? I'm forgetting, but it was a guy that was a single engineer on a ladder truck at an apartment fire, and the guy's talking about it like 30 years later, and he's still in tears as he heard the thud of the infant being thrown out by the mother of this, because there was wires everywhere. He couldn't even set the aerial, and he couldn't set a 35 on his own. So this is the point, is that I don't understand how we even got to the point where, well, 2 will be okay. 2 is never okay. On an ambulance, absolutely. I was on a 2-man ambulance my whole career, apart from my very first department. But on a fire engine or a truck, it's completely unsafe to just have 2 people. So I don't know how so many departments even allow that to happen in the first place.
Well, it goes, like I said, unfortunately, it goes back to, leadership and what they are or are not advocating for the department. They, when you're in those, like I said, I know it sucks, but it's politics. You're trying to maintain your department's budget, and you're trying to, and if you're on a full-time department with full-time people, most of your budget, almost 85+% of your budget is what? Salary and benefits.
Mm-hmm. Your people.
Most of it. Almost all of it, call it, right? Well, if you're the municipality and you say, well, our state funding now goes down, right? Where are we going to make the cut? So there's now a 10% cut across the board. Every department has to cut 10%. Well, if your department's, if you're the fire department and your budget is, say $8 million, you got to cut 10% of $8 million. You got to cut $800,000. Where is that going to come from? Right? Salary and benefits. What does that mean? That means less guys. We don't have a training budget, and most departments barely have a training budget already, right? There's no education budget, barely. We're barely getting the equipment that we want because salary and benefits constitute so much of our budget. Well, if the municipality tells you you're going to cut, that's the problem. So then it becomes, okay, well, we're not going to hire, these two guys are retiring, we're not going to rehire those two positions then. Or you come to everyone as the chief and you say, listen, this is the shit sandwich we're dealt with. We got these options, right? We can lay off 3 guys, 1 per crew. Everyone can do more work, right? Instead of laying off 3 guys, what we're going to do is this, all right? We're going to, these 2 other people, or maybe these 4 guys that are going to retire, we're not going to hire them back. These people also happen to be, say, in the prevention bureau. So instead of hiring for prevention, all the crews now we're going to go out and do inspections. Or we lay off 3 guys. Your choice. So what do you do?
Well, I mean, the 3 or 4 on a rig with the prevention thing, that's in hard times. Okay, during COVID, during the 2008 recession. Okay, but at what point do you tell your city, we cannot operate with less than 3, I mean, ideally 4 on an engine? And again, it goes back to the classrooms. The roads, we can't finish that freeway that goes halfway through our town. They'll find the money for that. You know what I mean? So at what point do people say, look, I mean, it's like having a police car with no police officer in there. I mean, even having 1 to a car. I mean, the ridiculous nature of a single officer responding to someone who's going to try and hurt them is mind-blowing in the richest nation on the planet. So this is what blows me away. We're not, the Sudan. We're the United States of America. We have the most wealth of anyone on the planet, and yet you've got, arguably not poverty-stricken neighborhoods that have 2 firefighters on a rig, and then everyone wonders why they weren't able to make a rescue when, God forbid, their family was burning to death in the 3rd floor window. So this, where I think, again, I understand the economics, but it's higher, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Security is the first thing. So your police, your fire, if that's being cut and cut and cut, which we know in our profession happens all the time, where is that voice to be like, oh, just so you know, like 3 is the bare minimum nationally. We cannot operate a fire engine or a fire truck with less than 3. I mean, obviously a truck, arguably 4. So, but people like one person rig, 2-person rig, and it's pure insanity. And I think, again, now do we have this opportunity to finally turn things around and not only in this recruitment for crisis help all the urban and suburban departments, but even, again, the volunteer and these areas where they're just woefully understaffed. Can we shine a spotlight and be like, let us explain to you what happens when your family is trapped and all that's available are these 2 firefighters. Let me show you what they would want to do, and let me show you what they're able to do. But that's not story told, is it? Where is that voice?
No, well, it is, but the people, again, it goes back to, like I told you with the budget committee. How much is it going to cost? They want to know, so it gets back to funding. So in Florida, when we were in Cocoa Beach during spring break, I was looking at different, how much you guys pay for property taxes. And I was shocked how much you pay. It's outrageous. Outrageous. The property taxes that you guys are paying. And then I did a deep dive into, I'm like, but their school, like you drive by the elementary school and it looks like shit. And your playground looks like garbage, you know, and there's literally like garbage on the fence and, you know, yada, yada, yada. It's like, you're paying what in property taxes? And especially in Cocoa Beach, I was like, you've got all these high rises or, you know, these are $1 million, every unit's $1 million frickin' dollars. You're collecting property taxes. Where's the frickin' money going? Like, what the frick? And then you're adding all these HOA fees and blah, 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 blah. I was like, no, I couldn't imagine owning anything down here, but that was the thing. Like, where is this freaking money going? If you're a municipality, if you're Cocoa Beach, right, or you're Cape Canaveral, which has between the two of them, I think the total population's like permanent population's like 12,000 people. You know, you've got Cape Canaveral's got a quasi department where they're part-time with some full-time guys. Cocoa Beach, though, is part of Brevard County, so they've got 2 stations that are fully staffed with full-time people, both running ambulances out of both of them.
I think Brevard certainly used to be 2-person rigs as well, if I'm not mistaken, for longer.
Yeah, and so you've got, but the point I'm making is all the money that you're collecting and all that property tax. Holy shit, where's it going?
Exactly my point. 2-person rigs, you're telling me that tourist destination with that transient tax coming in?
That's exactly right. And then I did a deep dive because I'm like, why does the school look so bad then? You know, I mean, like, what is going on here? Where's the money going? The roads are the same roads that I've been driving on since I've been going down there for, the last 10 years. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, you got hurricane fixings and, you got all that other kind. They're redoing the beach again. But that's all a state thing and, all this different stuff. So I did a deep dive into your property tax, what you guys are paying for. And I was shocked to find out that part of your property tax bill is separated for your school districts and your teacher salaries. They separate those two things out. Here in Wisconsin, you get one tax bill for your millage rates for your school districts is brought up by the district. Then you have your local municipal rates are set by the county itself. And that's it. That's it. So that's the money you're getting. The other part of that comes from the state of Wisconsin itself. And some of the things we do in the fire department here in Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin charges every commercial area, every insurance agent is called a 2% due. They have to pay 2% of their fire insurance coverage to the state. The state then takes that money and they divvy that out to the technical colleges and the departments to pay for the free education for firefighter 1, firefighter 2, all those different things. That's why those programs are free here in the state of Wisconsin. But again, my property taxes, I live in a nice house. It's great. My property taxes are only $3,500. They haven't gone up for 10 years. Haven't changed. That's the difference. When I talk about it deals with municipalities and it deals with locals and it deals with your county and it deals with your state. That's what I'm talking about. It is so incredibly different between every county and every state in this entire country that we have to understand that, what we can do here in Wausau, Wisconsin with what our state law literally says, what we can do on a tax roll and what we can charge municipalities or what we can, offer for services, that all deals with what the state allows in their budgeting process. And the state has capped. They have not allowed any kind of increases to be done in education or municipal tax bases, which is why my taxes haven't gone up for as long as they have.
Now, is that for the benefit of the community? Or is it
for the benefit of keeping your taxes low?
Okay, so it's me, not we again.
It's about keeping your taxes low. Our school district just failed another tax referendum. It was a referendum to exceed their revenue limit, to exceed the budget. They wanted to pay for other things. And they said straight up, if we don't pass this referendum, we're going to have to probably lay off teachers. We're going to have to get rid of curricular activities. We're going to have to get rid of sports. We may consolidate high schools. We're going to have to get rid of elementary schools. We're going to have to do all these things. The vote said no. Do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is after listening sessions. That is after public comment areas. That is after blah, 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 blah. Because when it comes down to it, how much am I paying?
Yeah.
That's what they want to know.
I paying. And this is, I think,
how much am I paying?
The issue that we have, when you think about the narrative, and this is apolitical, this is both frickin' sides of the aisle. But when was the last time you really heard the word us from any, national stage, like us coming together, making sure that our schools are safe, that our teachers are well paid? I mean, my son's about to graduate high school. Ever since he was tiny, the teachers were begging for, and I mean begging in a positive way, like they needed school supplies and cleaning supplies, and so the parents all chipped in. But these are really things that should have been included, so the teachers had all the ability to, for the books and the papers and the pens and things that I would imagine that we had that were taken care of when we were little. Yeah. And then you look at the fire service, like I said, lowballing these figures. So you've got 2 on a rig, and then God forbid, people are killed in the fire. Then there's this big investigation, and there's millions of dollars of lawsuits that could have been simply put into hiring those firefighters in the first place. Yeah. At what point do we go, where are our priorities? And I'll give you a perfect example. For arguably 30 plus years now, the obesity epidemic, probably more in the US, has been getting worse and worse and worse. Yep. So, and the drain on the Medicare, Medicaid system from that alone is in the, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the trillions. Oh, it's a ridiculous amount of money. So that alone it's just to me, it's like we don't want more money. Fire departments don't want more money. Teachers don't want more money than is already being spent. We just want you to proactively invest so you make the nation healthy. Imagine all the funds that will become available for all these other programs. You be proactive when it comes to drug prohibition. Stop arresting addicts unless they've done an actual crime, like beating someone up or robbed the house. Someone's house. Yeah. And put it into the healthcare system. Let them actually get the help that they truly need, addiction, mental health counseling, all the things. And now all of a sudden the crime goes down. So it's another, place. Now our police officers, maybe don't have to wear all this tactical gear like they're going to Fallujah. Like everything gets safer. The schools get safer. And it's not an oversimplification, because we all know that the people that are real experts in all these areas, the economics is undeniable. And countries that have done it differently have seen, an immense saving. So I think this is the conversation. Fire departments and teachers and all these different groups are labeled as greedy. We want more money, more money. We need the funds, but we don't want more money. We want the real, leaders of the world to step up, be proactive, take the money that's being wasted and invest it in the people. And it's the same with the firefighter work week. It's the same with the obesity crisis. We got to stop the downstream bleeding. But there needs to be a national conversation. And even most recently, we were told that we're supposedly going to make America healthy again. Well, I haven't heard anything apart from food dyes. And here we are now in basically May. So the money is there. We are such an affluent country, but we have to be proactive and invest in the areas that stop us spending money needlessly, and then take that money and really invest in schools and public safety and pedestrianized public areas where people can be out and move and play and get sunshine and have community. But you don't hear that. It's just, we need more money, more money, more money. And that's when you get this chopping block mentality in these cities and counties. Yeah.
Like you said, I think a lot of it, talking about, if we want to go back to the sleep issue, I think we could work the shifts we're working if our call volume was normal, right? If we had, like you said, if we had that tiered 911 system where we triaged the calls and appropriately put the rescue resources where they were needed, a true medical emergency, as opposed to someone calling 911 because they have a headache and they think they can get into the ER faster, right? If we would have a normal call volume that was true, like think about when you were working, right? All the calls that you went on, how many actually were 911, like actual emergencies, right?
Yep.
How many of them required a paramedic?
Probably 20%.
You know what I mean? So if we could solve that problem, I think is probably easier to solve, right? If you want to talk about what the hierarchy of what we could solve, like right now, that would be one that could easily be solved, right? 911 system, triaging the system, getting those things, getting appropriate resources to where they need to be, and having some, having the fixes to that, which would deplete the call volumes, take away all the the runs that we don't need to do 5 times a night after 3 o'clock in the morning, and then bringing these people to the ER and waiting for an hour because there's no one's available in the ER because it's full of people that don't need to be there in the first place, right? If we could get that solved, you're right. I think we would have a giant, huge relief off the call volumes that we could then we could maybe talk about and really actually hamper down into how much staffing we really have and all those different things. I mean, I remember I was reading an article, this is probably years and years ago, back when Philadelphia was trying to cut their budget for the fire department. And it was in one of the IAFF, magazines, blah, blah, blah. And they were talking about how they were looking to consolidate. They wanted to brown out stations and all this different stuff. Well, then I did a deep dive. I'm like, well, how many stations does Philly have and where are they and all those different things? Well, it turns out Philadelphia's locations of where their fire stations were was the distance a horse could travel at full gallop. That's how they determined where their stations were. And that became a set number. So that's where their stations were. It had nothing to do with call volume. It had nothing to do with where the resources that were needed and adequately staffed. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the distance a traveling horse could go at full gallop in 1900 when they were pulling a frickin' steamer. So when they're talking about consolidating stations, their stations are 1.5 miles or 2 miles away from each other. I couldn't imagine having a station that close. or closer.
Population, though. I mean, if it's
New
York,
it's a population. I know, but what I'm saying is, it goes into, this is the problem with, how do we fix all this stuff? And there's so many minutiae of history and levels of bureaucracy and the reasons why so many things are the way they're done that we just have no idea. We just have no idea. And and like you said, we need to go back to call volume is super high. Absolutely. Stress, sleeplessness, those are all huge things, and they're all the reasons why we're having a lot of the problems we're having. But what is the root cause of that? The calls. Well, can we do anything about the call volume? Can we actually control that? Can we actually make a big dent and a big difference into taking that call volume down, right? What do we really have control over? We can really control a 911 system, and it goes back to municipalities. So in our county, the sheriff's department controls 911. They do not want to have a tier system. Why? I'll tell you why. Because that would mean that every dispatcher would have to get trained as an EMD, an emergency medical dispatcher, which would mean more training, which would mean more money, which would mean they'd have to pay them more. And they have no interest in doing that.
How do they receive medical calls if they're not trained?
They just it's a dispatcher. You're literally you're an operator on the phone.
So they don't have any ability to
911, what's your emergency? I'm having a heart attack. What's your address? You're in this municipality. Page them.
Oh, my goodness.
Done.
So they can't tell you it's a Delta, Echo, Charlie, none of that?
Nope, doesn't matter.
Crazy.
Doesn't matter.
So there we go. It's another issue that needs to be addressed then.
So yeah, like I was saying, it's complicated. It's way more complicated than people realize. That's on a county level. That's not even a state level. That's not even on a municipality level. That's just one county of 72 in the state of Wisconsin. Now multiply that by how many counties we have in the country. Every county is different. Every single county is different.
So they're not even able to give advice. They can't talk through someone through CPR or a choking incident.
Could do that. That doesn't take medical training to do that.
It doesn't take training to give someone...
Tell someone to keep thumping on someone's chest?
The correct way?
No. They can't tell you if... They have no idea if they're doing it correctly or not. They can just tell you, keep doing chest compressions. Try to get, help is on the way.
Yeah, that sounds to me like that's another thing that should be a national standard in the world of dispatch. If you're dealing with medical and fire 911 calls, you should have the relevant training.
You want to get into more of it? I can tell you more stories. So here in the city of Wausau, before the sheriff's department took over 911, 911 was done by our fire department. Any 911 call that would come into the city fire department. Whoever was the lowest man on the totem pole at the fire department at the time, it was called desk duty. You got the desk. You would take shifts over your 24 hours. The young guy would do the desk. He'd answer all the 911 calls. And that firefighter would determine what the situation was and who would have to get dispatched out. That was it.
How long ago was this?
That was changed in the mid-90s. They changed that. It was called the doghouse rule.
So, because that's the old school way of doing in a lot of stations.
But that was until the mid-90s here.
So, but since the mid-90s, they've never been trained on fire and medical EMS. They've never had to have the EMD.
No.
To me, that sounds crazy. I don't know. Maybe that's how it is in a lot of the country, but it sounds crazy to me.
That's how it is in a lot of... Well, I know that's how it is I'm trying to think. I think there's only a couple of counties in the entire state of Wisconsin that have actual EMD. Of all the 72. I think you can count on one hand how many they are. And they're all urban.
See, what's interesting as well is
they're not the rural counties. And that's just 911. That's just on a county level.
You've talked about a really amazing initiative, which is paying for fire school. Like free education, I think is, you want to invest in your people that's going to give back for 20 plus years, putting young people, obviously with a testing initiative through all of this training and then creating all these great firefighter EMTs and paramedics. Amazing. But then on the other side, when it comes to the dispatch side, not so amazing. And just like you said, this has been really eye-opening for me. And working either side of the country really started opening my eyes initially, was we are so siloed that there's, you have these two departments right next to each other doing it completely different, sometimes not even talking to each other. God forbid you get a multi-agency incident. Yeah. But that means that people aren't sharing all the things that are working well, like Wisconsin education. Yeah, we'll definitely take this. Well, California, can we borrow your EMD because we're really behind on this area, And then the Northeast, hey, well, California, tell me about your volunteer. We still want to have a volunteer tier, but we really need to start making these positions career now. So how can we use that to filter through young people and give them an opportunity to be exposed to this profession? So this is what's so interesting with this podcast, is I get to speak to people from, all over the world. But yeah, some areas, it blows me away how innovative and how they have amazing solutions to some of our problems. But then as you touched on, two people on a rig and, the police dispatcher answering a medical call, having no real way of really relaying what might be a life-saving intervention, this not ridiculing Wisconsin in any way, but it just highlights that if we just dropped our humility, got rid of the red tape and the politics, and actually said, how collectively can we share each other's knowledge and, the rising tide lift all ships, our whole profession would elevate. But we don't, we're these little pockets that more often than not don't even talk to each other. And it's crazy.
Yep. And it's complicated and it's different. Like I said, in Michigan, most of the EMS in Michigan is hospital based. They're not run out of the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yep.
only a couple municipalities there where they actually run EMS, but most of the ambulances and most of the EMS system is run out of the hospital. Same thing in Minnesota. Most of it's run out of the hospital-based systems. So again, LA County, look at LA County. LA County, so the city of LA runs ambulance, but LA County doesn't. They still run the rescues like they did back in emergency back in the 70s, right? 2 guys on a rescue truck. But their funding, how they charge and what their funding model, you know what I mean? Like it's complicated and it's completely different than it would be in Orange County, which would be in Marathon County here. It's unfortunate that it has to be so convoluted and complicated, and the intricacies and the webs and the connections and the disconnections. It really is. It would just be simpler if things were more straightforward and people would leave their egos aside, and they would, do really what's the best thing for the entire group. It would be awesome, but people are the way they are. And, we've unfortunately, we have to work and try to do the best job we can, doing with what we can control. And, just again, going back to the local level, I got to worry about if I'm a lieutenant or captain of my station, I'm going to try to advocate the best for them. I'm going to make sure that my, people have the tools and training that they need, because that's what I can control. And if, something happens, I got to make sure that, I am there to help them and support them and to do what I can do to help those people get through the job and come home safely. That's what I can control, and I can only deal with that. And I can't, I can change what I can change, myself and what I have control over. And I can advocate and I can try to put up the chain the best, best facts and figures and stuff that's possible. But like I said, in order for anything to truly change, it has to come from the bottom up. It really does.
Absolutely. And I agree with you completely. Like, you want to change the world, start at home. Well, if that's a fire station, then that's where you start, your crew. And I think what's been pretty amazing to watch is the podcast has become a way to circumnavigate politics, union politics, the walls between cities and counties and PD and FD and EMS and these just like we've had, we've gone back and forth and had an amazing conversation with different perspectives. And this is what needs to happen. Like in less than 2 hours, all the things that we've covered, and now thousands of people are going to listen to this and they're probably going to go, wow, I didn't think of it this way, from whatever perspective. And the goal for the whole podcast is to get people what I call educated and angry, understand, the whys, and then go, well, wait a second, why are we doing it this way? Why do I not deserve to be home as much as the cop? So, this is what's so important, but that's exactly like you said, because I believe that the base of the pyramid is the most important. There's only one person at the very tip, but imagine if everyone at the bottom started shaking the pyramid. Well, things would start changing. You don't need your chief to be on board. You don't need your union president to be on board. You as a collective department need to get together and say, these need to change. We need to get more people in the engine. We are going to kill someone one day. And yet they just keep, doing the same thing, or the work week or fitness standards, or, insert whatever here. So, I agree completely. And this has been a vehicle for that, to try and speak for our profession that absolutely are focused on their home and their crew, and rightly so. And this is why I like to take on this fight myself, so I can be a voice for them. That being said, we've been talking for an hour and 45 minutes. I want to make sure that we would talk about your books and, the teachings and coaching that you offer now. So as a precursor, you had this, interesting career through the education system, then into the fire system, ultimately as a leader in the fire service. At what point did you decide that you looked at things a little differently and wanted to write books about your perspective?
Well, it goes back to, like we were talking about before, what can you control is really what you can really worry about, right? You can't really worry about stuff that's completely outside of your control. So when I was fire chief, I did a horrible job. 100%. I will fully admit I was a massive failure on everything and everything, that I could possibly do to go wrong or to, I was ripping Band-Aids off and blowing bridges up. And I did not play politics. I did it because I agree with you. I hate politics, James. I can't stand it. I think it's horrible. It's a waste of time. It's the root of almost all evils, right? Politics and money. And I 100%. And I did not play politics when I was the chief. And I tried to force change. And I tried to do things, that didn't go with the flow of what's been done for the past 100 years. I tried to, nope, we're just going to make this change because this is the right thing to do. And I didn't spend the time educating, even though I had been a teacher and have been a teacher for over 20 some years, right? Even though I've got a master's degree in freaking educational leadership, I knew better, but I was trying to force round pegs and square holes. Or I should say square pegs and round holes, right? Because it's obviously a circle is going to fit in a square. But I didn't do a good job communicating. I didn't do a good job of shaking hands and doing the things I needed to do as a chief. I didn't, and I paid the price for it myself, and the department paid a price for it because I didn't act in the role that I should have acted in, and I didn't. I don't want to call it a value in politics, but I didn't see how important it really was to really getting things done or to really making the changes that need to be made. So my second book, Read Before Leading, that's where that book comes up. That's all the massive problems that I caused and the things that I did and the things I wish I wouldn't have done. That book was written purely as a leadership book. Don't do what I did. Don't rip those Band-Aids off. Politics sucks, but it's a part of the position, especially at the higher levels, where you're going to have to do the things, and it's going to take time. That's the thing that I hated, and I have a hard time with, is I don't have a lot of patience, right? Especially in this service, we're all type A personalities and we want to get things done. Let's just do it right now. What are we waiting for? We know it has to be done. Just freaking get it done. And the thing I learned on the backside of that was patience. And it's going to take time. And, especially big changes are going to take time. And if you want to get things done right, and if that's your goal, right, if this is the goal, it's not going to happen in 6 months. It's not going to happen maybe in 2, 3, 4 years. It may be a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan to get to where you want to get. But I needed to learn that I needed to have the patience to investigate all the things we had just talked about. I didn't do a good job finding out who the political players were. I didn't find out, who the different advocacy or different agencies that I would need to pull on board to support me. I was trying to do everything by myself. And it doesn't work like that, right? Especially when you're in the municipal level, it takes everyone to work together. Everyone needs to play together in the same sandbox. We can't just be throwing out everyone else's toys and digging a hole for myself in the corner. We all have to work together in that sandbox. And I did not do a good job of doing the things I needed to do to try to get everyone to work together to help. Instead of building a sandcastle together, I was just trying to build one myself. And I was knocking everyone else's sandcastles down that were next to mine. Because I had my people and I had my department and I was in charge of, that's not the way to do it. That's not going to be successful. And you're going to make more enemies than you're going to make friends. So that second book is all about that. My first book, Too Dark 30, I wrote because of the teaching aspect. So when I got hurt on my first back injury, because of my history having been a teacher, I was kind of put into the position of, hey, Mark's the teacher. He can teach all the new guys. Fine. I like teaching. I don't have a problem with that. But what happens when you give someone the job and responsibility and then you take them out of that role or they get hurt and they get sidelined? Well, now who fills the hole, right? So I was fielding phone calls. I was getting emails about, hey, when you were doing this on that crew, what were you doing? Or, what was going on with this? So I realized that I'm like, you know what? I've got experience and I kind of know what I'm doing teaching wise. I should just put all my thoughts and ideas down. So I did. Well, that translated then into the book Too Dark 30, which was all the summation of all the knowledge and all the things that I found out, how to be a successful teacher, how to break things down for students, how to look at, what are they, don't expect them to know things right away. Don't assume different things. Bring everyone, again, a lot of the same kind of stuff where you're being in a leadership position, trying to break things down simply, try to get things in a logical order, try to make sure that you're evaluating people correctly, you're looking at the right things you want to look at, because in the end, we want these people who are on the bottom of the, like you said, the bottom of the pyramid, we want to raise them up those hierarchy levels. We want to get them to positions where they can take control over what they're now knowledgeable of, and we can, let them go into the environment and God bless you, and get out there and do it, right? So that book is purely about being a good teacher, how to be an educator, how to be a good instructor, how to be a good FTO, a mentor, coach, all those different things. So the two books, because in my opinion, to be a good leader, you need to be a good teacher. If you can't teach someone well, at least remotely well, then you're going to have a hard time leading anything. Because part of your job as a leader, at least the true job of a leader, like we talked about, is worrying about your crew, your staff, and making sure that you're supporting them and giving them everything that you need to get to them, that their job is done successfully and safely. That is the entire purpose of your job as a leader. So if that means teaching, that means teaching. If that means showing them how to do something and instructing them how to do it, that's what it means. So I think those two books go hand in hand, which is why I wrote them. But really for me, it was about, sharing all my knowledge and getting the word out, because like you said, so many people are out there on social media, pounding their chest and, having these salty mustaches and, acting like they're the biggest king shit in the world. And, it's hard to watch sometimes, and it's hard to listen to some of their views sometimes. And it's just like, you're not helping, that's not the best way to do it. But we have to make mistakes, life's about making mistakes. Life is about failing miserably and learning from those mistakes, and I wouldn't be where I am now if I hadn't have done all the screw ups and all the mistakes I made either. So, I wanted to write things that are conversational, that aren't written like a textbook, that you could sit down and just read like you and I are having a conversation. That's how I wrote them, and the audiobooks are they, yep, that's me droning on in my stupid Midwestern accent. Yeah, that's me talking, and that's me discussing what I know and what I've had and what I've done. And, if you can grab something from it, great. If it can, spur on a discussion with someone, fantastic. If we can, have a new idea, or, hey, I want to try that, or I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to twist it to fit my situation. Awesome. That's all I want. That's all I want.
Question for you.
Yeah.
If you were king for a day and you could literally, as they say in Disney, reimagine the group of people that you have to interact with as a fire chief, so that conversation would simply be, like I said, that room of grown-ups that were really just trying to do the best thing for their community, what would need to be in place so that the other members of these departments were the right kind of people that wouldn't create all these barriers and you wouldn't have to politic with? You just simply have the same kind of conversation that we had today, get to the root of the problem, figure out what is the path to the solution, and therefore grow and empower your community rather than in what we're seeing recently, a crumbling element.
Well, number one, if I was king for a day, I would be probably assassinated right away. Because unfortunately, it was a lot like when I was fire chief. I tried to make the changes and force changes. And, what I have learned over my time and what I learned in, my leadership experiences was it's not as simple as just being king for a day, unfortunately. It's not just being, God, right? Go back to the classic, Jim Carrey movie, where he gets all the powers of God, right? And he's, and he's got to answer everyone's emails and all those people. Every single person, they all have our own wants, desires, needs. We all come with our different perspectives. We all come with our different histories. We all come with our different backgrounds. We all come with our different, could be cultural things. It could be even like we talked about the differences in regionality, weather regional differences. I was under a tornado warning last night, so there are so many parts to that puzzle that it's never easy to just come up with just one answer. It's not. Realistically, in a perfect world that we don't live in, it should be easy to just make consensus decisions and say, hey, we should just, why don't we do, a certain percentage of the property tax is going to be just directly related to the fire and EMS service. And we're going to base it like this. And this is the tier structure. And we're going to incorporate all the best ideas across the nation. And this is how we're going to do it. That would be awesome. Right. But again, it takes more than just fire and EMS, right? It's the ER system. It's our healthcare system. We just talked about, you mentioned the making America healthy again. Yeah, it's massive, problems with obesity and, the things that go into our foods and the sugar, the refining sugars that were, all the, junk food that's out there, what's in the kids' lunches at school, or what kids are coming home to and eating, or the shockingly high statistic of how many people eat fast food as their main food for the day. They don't make their own food. They just eat out every day, every meal, and that's hugely high in urban areas, right? They go out to lunch at their work. They go out to lunch. And then when they're coming home, they don't make their own dinner. They go out and have dinner at 8:30 at night at some restaurant and pay, but that's their culture, but that's their way. But again, going back, it's not just one simple thing. It's so many things that are together, and it would be hard, almost impossible, really, to be the king for the day, to make all the decisions, to just make everything correct. Because like you said, it's not just one thing. It's the education system has to be changed, everything has to be changed. It really does. And, it's so much that has to be fixed that it can be overwhelming. And where do you start? Well, it's the old saying, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step, and it goes back to what I said. We can only deal with what we can control. And for me, that's, locally, I can't worry about Florida. I can only worry about what we do here in Wisconsin, and vice versa. You can't worry about what goes on in Wisconsin. You can't worry about what goes on in Minnesota. I give my hope, and I can give you my support, and I can, give you all the things that I can give you to help you in your process to get to where you want to go. But it's up to us individually, locally, that we're ever going to really see anything really, really change.
Let me rephrase the question, because that was a great answer to the question, but I want to pinpoint it a little bit more.
Sure.
A lot of the issues that we discussed today, including obesity, including, the understaffing of first responder and the overworking of first responder agencies, ultimately comes from the wrong people continuing to get at the top of the totem pole. how do we, as a principal, change the way that we choose people so you actually get someone who is compassionate, who thinks about us rather than we, to be at the heads of, I mean, it could be, we're talking the president or simply the chief of a fire department or even the lieutenant at a station. How do we get the right kind of person that has that community mind, that has that passion and caring for their people? Because if that happens in a station, in a household, that permeates then through the entire nation ultimately.
Yeah, it's another $1 million question with $1 million answer, right? Yeah, I mean, part of it has to be, I mean, the answer, the honest answer is we need to put people, or I shouldn't say put, maybe put's the wrong word, but like we need to elect, or we need to, find, or we need to recruit maybe, the people that don't want to be in those positions. Right. I mean, it's the classic, I don't want to be in charge. Well, that's why you should be in charge. Right? Because you don't want to be in charge. Because the people that want to be in charge, 9 times out of 10, they may have the best intentions and they may talk a good game and they may talk, they walk the walk and, they say all the right things. But when push comes to shove, when things, come down or whatever, they're going to look out for themselves. And, going back to, how do we put the right, let's just say the fire department, right? Let's just concentrate just on the fire department. How do we get the best leaders for the fire department? Especially when, they'll say, well, we only had 2 candidates. These are the 2 people that we got to choose from, right? If we only got 2 candidates, pick the lesser of 2 evils. Well, why is that? Why does it have to be like that? Right? Why does it have to be, well, those are the only 2 people that applied? Why isn't it merit based? Why isn't it, well, James has been on this department for this many years and he's done all these different positions and he's a fantastic instructor, he's a fantastic leader, I think he'd make a fantastic overall chief, because I think he's got the best interest at heart and he wants to do the best job for everybody. Why is that not the qualification? Right? Why does it have to be, well, Mark was the only person that applied, so we're going to hire Mark. And Mark sucks. And Mark doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And Mark's, Mark only cares about himself, and Mark's only using this job as a stepping stone on a resume to make sure he can get, the experience that he can get a different job at a different, larger department, or, insert whatever there, right? That's the problem, right? We are not selecting people for positions of leadership that should be selected for leadership. We are going back to the easy way out of saying, well, that's just the way our process is. They're talking about process, right? Going back to the contract. Well, the contract says that we need to publish this position for 30 days, and these are the requirements of that position. And if you don't meet the requirements, then you cannot apply it, yada, yada, yada. I worked for a lieutenant when I was first on the city of Wausau who did not have an associate degree, was on the department for 25 plus years, had every position, was now a lieutenant because of seniority, was a fantastic leader, a fantastic instructor, had everything for the right reasons. We would literally die for him, right? And he was overlooked all the time because he didn't have an associate degree, or he didn't have this certification. Well, he didn't go to school because blah, 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 blah. Well, he was in the Marines and had experience, you know what I mean? Like, he's got other things going on for him, right? My resume, go to my website, go to my LinkedIn. Holy shit, Mark, whoa, he's got a lot of shit. Yeah, I do. Guess what? It doesn't matter a hill of freaking beans if I can't put any of it to work. Like I said, I have a master's degree. So freaking what? So what? Doesn't matter. If you can't apply what you know, if I can't help other people achieve things, which is the entire purpose of leadership, then it doesn't matter a hill of beans how many freaking degrees I have or what certifications I have, or, all the, I have 10 different letters of recommendation from 10 of my best friends that happen to, you know what I mean? Like, so freaking what? None of that matters. And the other thing that I think that, we need to really look at, besides really doing a merit-based system and finding the people that don't want to do it, that's why you should do it, is when the entire group tells, hey, James is the man. I would follow James. Let's get, put him in that position, right? You may not want to do it, James, but we're going to be here with you. I think that's the other thing. People, we are so much in a cannibalistic, like, well, he stepped up, right? He's now one of them, and he's getting told from on high to do, A, B, and C, and now we're going to give him the cold shoulder because he's not one of us anymore, and, fuck him, and, he's selling out, and blah, 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 and now we're not, you know what I mean? We are horrible at that kind of stuff. Horrible at it. Just the gossip train, stirring the pot. We're horrible at doing those things. Cutting people off at the knees, not giving them a chance. They stuck their neck out. Maybe that's the other thing too. Like, people are afraid to take the big step up because they've seen how many guys get chopped out from underneath, right? I'm not going to put myself in that position. Screw that. I'm fine just where I'm at. And then you have a leader who's fantastic sitting on the sidelines who could really make a difference. And again, why? Because we do it to ourselves. And, that's sad and it's unfortunate. And it goes back to, what I said before. We can only control what we can control, and we can only help it what we can really affect. And when we do those types of things, and we don't change the system the way it is, and we allow the other stuff to happen, nothing's ever going to make a difference. All the money in the world doesn't make a difference. You could have the best system. You could have the most perfect system in the world, James, and unless you have the leadership and the right people in charge of it, doing the right things for the right reasons, it's never going to matter. It's never going to matter.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to round this off. That was such a beautiful kind of, it was exactly what needs to be said. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. For people listening, if they want to find the books, if they want to reach out to you for the coaching and the other areas that you offer, where are the best places to find you, website, social media?
All my stuff, you can look me up on LinkedIn, Marc with a C, the appropriate way to spell Marc. Hill. Obviously, my books are all on Amazon. You can look up either my name, or you can look up Too Dark 30, or look up Read Before Leading. Otherwise, my website, which is toodark30.com, it's all written out, no numbers. Or you can get a hold of me on my website as well. My email address is Marc Hill, all one word, at toodark30.com. So I'm out there. You can look up Too Dark 30. That's where most of my stuff is found under.
Beautiful. Well, Marc, I want to say thank you. I mean, just even for the conversation, just having the ability to explore areas and get two different perspectives, I think is so, so important. So kind of taking this path down, mining and education, and talking about some of the working environments, and then, the leadership, has been a phenomenal conversation. So I want to thank you so, so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you for having me, James. I loved being here. And if you want to have me come back, I'll come back anytime you want.